Your race,
identity,
culture, and heritage matter.
Because of that, we've created a space
for safe conversations
that accelerate human connection
by exploring and acknowledging variations and points of view.
The goal
is to bridge the human divide.
Welcome to an episode of Rich Dialogues
on the Care More podcast.
Hey, man. Welcome back to the Rich Dialogues podcast. It's always good to have you on set with me.
Right.
Yeah. So I want to have a little bit of conversation about this thing about allyship and belonging. So if I think of even if we take like your journey to Africa, it's like you felt like you belonged there when you were there, and you felt just the adjacency, like it was all good. But you take that same construct, you put that in corporate America, that some people are being othered, and some people are without question feeling like they belong. Mm-hmm. So when you hear the word belonging, as everybody's throwing it around in a lexicon right now, what does that actually mean to you?
It means a couple different things. We measure at the agency at BBDO, we measured belonging across 4 categories that studies show drive the feeling of belonging inside of corporate spaces specifically. So we asked folks to rank us across whether or not they felt seen, supported, connected, and proud to work at the organization.
Seen, supported, connected, and proud.
Seen, supported, connected, and proud. So we asked folks to rank us, and then we had a conversation around what that meant as it relates to folks feeling like they belonged and felt welcomed at the agency. Because we often talk about belonging and inclusion as kind of the outcomes of diversity practices. And hiring, right, and retention and all of that. And we forget that the act of belonging, the act of creating a sense of belonging is a responsibility. It's a tactical thing, right? You actually have to take actions along that way. And so for us, it was really helping folks understand our individual responsibilities in that process, and then identifying what the organization had to do to make sure that we belong. So we created platforms around that to make sure that mental health platforms, as an example, to invite people to be their fullest selves. So that's a part of belonging that I think is important that we often miss.
Okay, so let's take it down a couple of levels, and I want you to think about, so if you go inside of corporations, you get inside some of these businesses, belonging already exists for certain populations, and then it seems like the people are asking the organizations to create the path to belonging for people who are marginalized. And I don't know if that's actually a real thing. I mean, because what I want to talk about it, if you look at a person's race, their identity, their culture, and their heritage, it's like, whose responsibility is it to belong someplace? If I know I'm coming in as a marginalized group or someone who's invisible, it doesn't matter what dimension of diversity I represent, whose responsibility is it for me to experience belonging in an organization? Who do you think it is?
I don't know if this is going to jive with you, but I'm going to say it's a shared responsibility. One, it's my responsibility as a marginalized person to understand how I can and navigate how and in what ways can I be my fullest self in that environment. And then there's the general population's responsibility to create those opportunities, to help create those opportunities. One, because why do I think it's a shared responsibility? Oftentimes the labor of that is left on us only, right? When we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we're often, as marginalized folks, left with the task of having to create those spaces. What I'm trying to explain here is that while we have a responsibility to show up our fullest selves and be unapologetic about that, there's also a shared responsibility with the organization and the general population to make sure that the space is ripe for us to do that. The other thing around belonging is that we often talk about being your fullest self. But let's redefine that. Let's double click on that, because what that really means, if we're honest with ourselves, is that what the general population is asking us to do is to only bring that of ourselves that is comfortable to them. Anything else is unwelcome. So when we're inviting people to be their fullest selves, we have to be mindful that what we're really asking them to do is only bring that which is acceptable to general population. Because anything other than that will feel uncomfortable, right? To them.
Why do they have to, why? Why do they have to be comfortable? If you say bring my full self or my fullest self, and I'm gonna say there's a lot of iterations of that.
Sure.
You're saying fullest self. Does it got whole self, best self? Like these are all like synonymous for the moment, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do I have to make them comfortable? There's an inherent problem with that.
Right. Well, you don't have to make them comfortable, and that's the problem, right? It's in their view, they have to feel comfortable because they are the general population. But I think in the truest sense of belonging, it's not about embracing difference. It's about celebrating difference, inviting it in. Different concepts. You can tolerate difference in the workplace. You can still get your job done. You can still talk to your employees by the water cooler or whatever. But to really connect with someone, which is what we're all here to do as human beings. We're here to learn, connect, and grow with one another, right? If we're really in that spirit, then the general population has to think about how they might be more inviting of difference and how they might be more embracing and celebratory of difference, not just tolerating of difference. And I think that's why it's important.
Yeah, and I want to challenge you, at least get your point of view on, if I bring a version of myself to work, there is centuries of research that says every time marginalized groups have tried to do that, they've been shut down. So the neuroplasticity, what we're wired to do is not bring our full selves. And now we have this open invitation to bring ourselves when everybody in my family, if you look back and you look across generations and you go all the way back to slavery, anybody that tried to bring a different version was shut down, extinguished, even in some areas. So we're asking something that we are not wired to do naturally. So I don't know that we're ever going to get there, but we keep saying, let's do it. And we're trying to attach belonging as this, in the lexicon, it's like, we want a culture of belonging, which I'm calling a bullshit card on, because it's not really what we want. So how do we get around that? Like, where do we need to start to make that make sense for everybody? So everybody's having the kind of experience where they do belong someplace, but belong for what reason? It's so interesting. Belong for what? Why do I need to belong? Just let me do my fucking job.
Yeah.
Or do I actually need to belong?
I think to unlock the best of ourselves, we have to feel like we belong, right?
Okay.
Like as human beings, our fundamental need is one of connection and community. And we spend so much time at work with our colleagues. We spend more time at work with our colleagues, virtually or otherwise, than we do with our loved ones. And so if that's where we're spending a majority of our time, and we're wanting to, I'm going to appeal to our better angels here, that we all spend time at work wanting to produce great work, wanting to self-actualize and all of those things, then why not invite that spirit of belonging and community into that space? And anything else, anything other than that is, to me, is a waste of time. So I might be speaking a very kind of aspirational dream world. But I do think that we are living in a time right now brought about by the world that we live in, where if there was ever a time for us to challenge those notions of what does belonging mean, now is that time, right? When you think about the ways that we create culture and who creates that culture, I think you can't argue with the fact that whether it's on TikTok, social media, whatever, that Black folks create a lot of that culture, right?
Yeah,
and then that's rinsed, washed, and repeated for the masses and for brands, right? And so I think when you think about the value that we bring to organizations, not just Black folks, but marginalized folks in general, the difference of thought, the difference of backgrounds and opinions, all of that is of value. And I think bringing it back full circle to the language of business, right? For anyone that's watching this, that might be a CMO and thinking about the value of all this, well, we live in a world where it's increasingly different. It's increasingly diverse. And so I often talk to our clients about whether or not you have a growth strategy is dependent on whether or not you have a multicultural one. And if you don't have a multicultural strategy, then you don't have a growth strategy. And so I think it all kind of intertwines in that way.
If I get down to this individual level, I hear where you're coming from, and if I look at belonging and I try to translate this over into allyship, there's a thread here of a conversation. So we know, or maybe some people know this and don't know this, but there's a human interaction, this connection thing that you're talking about. There's a chemical thing that happens in us. So serotonin actually releases when I feel safe around you. And you tell somebody to have create this sense of belonging. If I'm not feeling anything and the chemicals don't align, and the other chemical shows up, which is adrenaline, because I'm trying to protect myself, then I am not ever going to experience the feeling of belonging to the level where I can produce more, I can be more innovative, because I'm always trying to protect something. And so I think what I want to hear your take on is how we can get the viewers who are listening to this is to own that they are having anytime you interact with somebody, you're messing with chemicals. You're messing with the biology of a person. There's a lot of research with neuroscience right now about this and belonging and the biased brain. How hard is it? At what point you decide, I've tried enough. The version that I have it's enough because I'm using up too much of the wrong chemical in order to stay here and thrive. What do you need to thrive? What do you need in a culture, in an organization, from a human? Forget where you work. I'm saying, what do you need to like be your best?
I need to feel psychologically safe.
Okay.
I need to feel like I'm at a place where there are degrees of bringing my best self to that space, right? I need to get to a point comfortably, and I know we talk about this in the trainings often, is that what do I know to be true for myself? What do I need to reconcile within myself so that I can show up my fullest self in this space? But a prerequisite to that is an environment that feels psychologically safe to a certain degree. You know, do I feel like I can raise my hand and ask a question if I don't know the answer to something? If I can't, if I don't feel that way, then that's a red flag, right? If I feel like I can have conversations with my colleagues about whatever the task at hand is, I need to be able to do that, unless, you know, or otherwise it's not worth it. So that basic level of psychological safety that you build over time with your colleagues, with your bosses, with the organization is, I think, the absolute minimum in order to achieve that and unlock that.
Okay, so there are people who are trying to navigate what's going on in their, I'm using the term social lives, meaning their outside of work lives, and trying to navigate their professional lives at the exact same time. And so this illusion of work-life balance, I actually believe it's never been about work-life balance, and we use that, we bastardize that for a long time. Sure. It's really been about productivity balance. It's like, when can I be most productive in my personal life? Because I have family, I have kids, I have elder care, I have all the things that I'm dealing with. So where do I find balance in that? And where do I find balance in my workplace? And somewhere in the middle, I have to feel safe enough to try, risk, fail, get up, keep going, resilience, all those things in both those worlds. Right. So if you look, what I draw to that is, there in everybody's life, there has to be an ally. There has to be somebody who's fucking helping them in some way, shape, or form. So when you hear the term allyship, what does that mean to you? Because everybody's throwing that word out right now. Yeah,
allyship is part of the reason why I do this work. As an ally myself and as a beneficiary of allies throughout my career. So I'll unpack that for a little bit. You need folks, it doesn't matter how talented you are, you need people in your life, both in your personal and professional life, that are in a position to unlock doors that you don't even know exist sometimes. So I think that's fundamentally true. And you can label that allyship, you can talk that could be mentorship, however you want to phrase that, right? But that's absolutely true. As it relates to diversity work, I come to this work as a cisgender man although I'm a black man, with privilege. And what I try to do is explore how I might be able to use that privilege and my voice in that platform to unlock pathways to success for other people. So I consider myself as an ally, right? Then you have folks in position of power that might be white males, who are the folks that are traditionally in positions of power inside of organizations, that I think have a responsibility to use their voices and their platforms to create pathways to success. So there are degrees to allyship, in my view, that I think we can all exercise. I think I can be an ally to someone else. I can be an ally to a woman, to an LGBTQ person. I can be an ally to a disabled person or differently abled person in my own unique way. Part of successful allyship, in my view, is adopting an abundance mindset, right? A mindset that looks at the world as an ever-evolving, expanding pie that we all can work together to increase and expand, and therefore have more to break up. But if you have a mindset of, there's not enough out here for all of us to win, and so therefore I have to, stomp on someone's neck for me to win, I think that's what got us into this mess to begin with, right? And so it's just really redefining what allyship means and adopting an abundance mindset that allows us to get there.
Yeah, let's drill down on this abundance mindset. So I get it, and I agree with it on a couple of levels, but I think abundance mindset looks different for people of color and for dominant culture.
Yeah.
Anybody who's in whoever that dominant culture is, that mindset, people have different access points to it. So what does abundance mindset look like if I'm trying to have a better life?
I'm thinking capitalism, dismantle capitalism. Like that's just my first thing, right? But that's where, we have to have that conversation.
Yeah.
It's, capitalism and the economic system that we live in is fundamentally based on folks that have and folks that have not, and really rooted in a system of scarcity, right? Ingraining in people that there is this fundamental scarcity. And I'm an economics major, which is hilarious, right? Like I studied economics, and economics is fundamentally about how people make choices faced with limited resources, right? And how you maximize those resources. So I think the conversation around abundance has to start there, in understanding that for dominant culture, abundance means how much more can I get? And what it requires is a redefinition of how much is enough. For folks that are marginalized, it's thinking about what's possible and thinking about what can I attain.
No, that's so interesting though. So for marginalized people, it's moving through the mind. Abundance mindset is how can I get more,
Right.
at the baseline.
Sure.
But it's through that survival mentality of what's possible.
Correct.
And for dominant culture, for people who are already part of the 3%, 1%, like whatever the hell people want to call it, it's like how much more can I get, even though I have plenty.
Sure.
And I don't know how people are supposed to reconcile that when you get inside of corporations or you get inside your family structures and you're talking about, we want to have a better life, a quality of life for our kids. We want to create a better quality of life and you're talking about abundance, but what does that mean? How do I reconcile that and think about that in a healthy context?
Yeah.
Because as a coach, I have people dealing with, I don't have enough, and as hard as I am trying to get more, it is unhealthy because I see my mortality in front of me, and it's like I can't get there fast enough.
Yeah.
That's a different type of abundance for one group versus another group. It's like I have plenty, but I'm trying to do this abundance thing for generations. I just don't know how do you help people reconcile that?
I mean, I think it's, I don't come from money, and I think it's ingrained in how we're taught, right? We're not taught basic principles of finance growing up, right? Compound interest, savings, all of that. Like, so those are things that I've had to learn over time. And so I think starting at that point is fundamentally changing the way that we educate ourselves around finances and money, and what that means. I come from a household that my mom had to struggle, right? And really think about how she maximized her paycheck from one week to the next. And that is an ingrained scarcity mindset, right? And so I think it's unlearning that is half the battle, right? Just to unlearn that.
Yeah.
And then to learn new habits around that is another lifetime.
Yeah.
And so for those of us who are privileged enough to learn that in our lifetime and then apply those skills, is an incredibly important and powerful thing. But I think it does start with redefining what is enough, right? What do we need to be fulfilled in life, from a financial standpoint? And everyone has to ask that question, not just folks that have it.
I challenge everybody who's listening right now. Do you have enough? And if the answer is no, like what is enough?
Right.
Because it can damage a relationship.
Yeah.
Fracture a whole community as you strive to answer that question if you don't have a clear enough answer for what it
and
is.
if you talk about abundance, right, it's the notion that there's enough out here for all of us to win. I don't have to stomp on your neck for me to win. If I have an abundance mindset, then I'm like, how do we work together to enlarge the pie so that you get more and I get more? Right. Now, there's another conversation around the proportions of that more, right? My more might be 50% more, your more might be 10% more.
Yeah.
That's another conversation. But I think it's having that abundance mindset to begin with is part of the conversation.
Yeah, there's a quote that I was in some of my readings. It was a quote that somebody says people are experiencing a lot of stress in their life, and they were trying to dig down into like what's stressing you out. And so we think about this abundance mindset, and we think about finances in particular, how some people grew up not. Everybody says the term, "I didn't come from money," which means that there's a lot to unpack in "I didn't come from money," because based on where I am in the world, there are a lot of people who didn't come from money and they're extremely fulfilled.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm great. Matter of fact, I don't need all that. So there's this other thing to unpack. But in terms of stressors, someone made this line. It came through some research, and I can't call it up right now. But they said, if finances are a stressor, you need to look at your sources of revenue. And of course, you're stressed out about finances if you only have one source of revenue. So if your job, which equates to your check, and you are stressed about finances, it's because you only have one source of revenue. But if you look at how people who understand wealth, they have multiple sources of revenue. So the one stressor that people of color tend to live their entire lives through, because they weren't taught anything different, of course they're stressed out.
Yeah.
And of course answering that question enough comes with only one lens.
Yeah.
I need more salary.
Yeah.
Or I need a better job that has more money, versus I need to create multiple sources of income. I need to follow and or learn what the wealthy do and how they manage. There's all these other implications.
And listen, I think I don't want to gloss over the fact that this is, that lack mentality, that mentality of like, man, how do I make this dollar stretch, is all rooted in real lived experience.
That's right.
Right? And that lived experience has been reinforced, and it's a structure, it's a system in place that actually makes that happen. So I don't want to gloss over that. But within that, I think part of what you're alluding to, which is there are many of us that don't come from money, that have gotten to a point in our lives where we understand the power of money and are probably able to, aspire to more and have achieved more. Part of that, the ability to do that, is because we've changed our approach to money and understood it, as most people that do have money, as a tool, right? It's not a medium for us to identify ourselves through. It's a tool that we use and leverage. It's an energy, right? To use that language that flows through all of us. That if you understand it, you understand that the more you get more of it by releasing and kind of letting it flow more in your life. So if you treat it as an energy and as a flow and as a tool, as opposed to kind of a thing that you measure yourself by and your self-worth by, that's a fundamentally different conversation. And allows you to start to kind of emerge from this lack of, this mentality of like, man, I don't know, this isn't enough. How do I make this stretch? To, I know that there's more out there. How do I get more? How do I tap into that more?
Yeah, and it's just a realignment of, it's some of the unlearning that you're talking about. That's why another way I look at allyship. So when you look at people who help us, and people conflate, mentor, coach, sponsor, ally, that kind of thing. But if somebody's helping you, one way to help shape the narrative around what enough is and what I need to have an abundance mentality comes because there's an ally in your life.
Sure.
An ally in your life. So I want to talk about the emotional things that are attached to allyship. And people keep throwing around this word called empathy. One of the things I'm centered on is getting people to understand that while empathy certainly is important, with everything that's going on right now, it is certainly not the answer.
Sure.
There's more than just empathy. That is, I have way too many people who sit in leadership positions that are rolling out entire empathy values. It's like respectful empathy, show empathy in your coaching, show empathy in the recruiting. That's not the only thing when it comes to this thing about belonging and allyship. So what is empathy? Yeah. What do we really mean? What are we really looking for? I want to challenge our listeners into that.
I want to challenge folks, right? Because I think you said it. Empathy is it's one ingredient in that stew that you're trying to create, which is in the equity stew, if you will, right?
Don't you do it. Don't you call it
the equity stew.
Come on, man.
I don't know. That's what just came to me. But okay. So it's just an ingredient. But I'm going to challenge folks in thinking about empathy through these lenses, through this kind of prism. And that is, there's a difference between being an ally and being an accomplice. And I can't take credit for this. This is, it's been said before and kind of overstated. The difference between an accomplice and an ally is, an ally says, you go first. This is your battle to fight. I'm going to be here if you need me. Versus an accomplice says, this is my battle to fight just as much as it is yours. And I'm going to lead from the front. And I'm going to stand right next to you and fight this battle. And I think we need more accomplices. We need more people that are going to be willing to put their necks on the line, so to speak, and look at this battle for equity, as it were, as their battle to fight. Even if they're part of dominant culture, even if they're part of the haves and not necessarily the have-nots, I think we need people to start looking at it that way.
Yeah. What do you think? What emotion do you think happened in the summer of 2020? Was it did people move from please, I hope no one took on a pity mindset. It at least got to sympathy, empathy, and there's this thing called compassion that just people aren't talking about. Sure. And I'm gonna push compassion like a long way because that sits on the accomplice side. Sure. But what happened in 2020 that people started to feel from your point of view, where you sit?
I think part of, and I have to say this, part of what happened in 2020 and the reaction that we saw was largely driven because we were all at home and we had no choice but to pay attention. We were all sitting at home watching the news like everyone else, couldn't go outside, we couldn't hang out with our friends and distract ourselves with all the other things in the world that we could distract ourselves with. So we had to choose, and so I think what we saw was a direct arrow to that thing inside of all of ourselves that really truly cares about the next person. And I think that was what began kind of that movement. What I hope was not lost in that, right? As we are, almost 2 years removed from that time, is that level of empathy, that level of compassion, that level of care that we have for the next human being has not been lost and has not been diluted by time and by the fact that we're now starting to see that we're getting back to some sort of normalcy. Because what happens if something happens tomorrow? Are those same folks that were leading the protests across the nation, across the world, are they going to go back out in the streets and put their jobs on the line, put their livelihoods on the line? I'd like to see, I don't want to say I'd like to see that, but I wonder.
No. What, really?
No, but I'm just saying, I don't want to see us be in an environment where we have to react to another instance like that requires that. But I do wonder if that same level of passion and care still exists in some people, right? And so I think that's where, going back to allyship versus accompliceship, it's do you have that same level of energy, right? And do you see my fight being your fight as well? Or did you see it as an opportunity just to say, look, I'm at home, not doing much, everyone else is doing it, let me go out there, make a sign about Black Lives Matter and get out there. And I think that's where that's the rubber meeting the road.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of corporations have moved into this empathetic phase where, so if you sort of look at sympathies where like I feel for you, like that happened to you, so I feel for you. Sympathy is okay, but this empathy where I feel with you is what sort of happened over the last 18 months. But like we see a lot of corporations stepping into that space. But what I don't see enough of, which I want people to call people out on or call people into, is this conversation around compassion, is that I'm here to help you, not just I feel with you. So for a dominant culture to sit beside me and go, I feel it, I'm with you, but not do anything. Compassion triggers you to do something.
There's an act, right? So yes, the empathy is passive, compassion is proactive. Right? It requires you to do something. It requires you to step outside of your comfort zone and risk something. I think that's really what it is, right? Like, what are you risking for the sake of the greater good, right? And for the greater good of society? What are you risking? I don't want to get into this whole COVID vaccine thing, but that's another example, right? Where we're seeing this disconnect where, some folks, let me say this, Reggie, I think we are living in a time that is, if there's ever been a time of individualism, I wonder, are we thinking about the next generation that follows us in the same way that those folks did about us?
Well, it's a polarizing thing that you're talking about, but it is a real conversation that happens behind closed doors.
Sure.
I know it does, because some people are thinking about the now and the moment. It's like, doesn't feel right for me.
Right.
And this can be, you can take vaccine, you can take any of the things that polarize us, that disrupt our society, and most people take it from a first person point of view, like this is what's best for me right now, this is what I need to do.
Right.
But there's a generation that you are supposed to be leaving something better and improved for, that we're trying to get more people to adopt, and even how they think about it. It doesn't mean they may change something for right now, but they shouldn't be in the fucking way.
It's a consideration.
If people are trying to do something to make things better, to make things different, then be the ally that helps that. Even if you make a personal choice behind closed doors to do something different, don't be in the way of progress.
And I want to make sure that I'm not shading anyone that's made that personal choice for themselves,
neither
right?
am I.
But I think that
Super
there
clear.
is a conversation, there's a narrative out there that is rooted in, I don't give a fuck about you, and I don't give a fuck about anything else. This is what I want to do. And that level of selfishness, that level of self-absorbedness, isn't necessarily thinking about the greater good for everyone else. This conversation isn't new, right? And again, we can apply it to the vaccine, we can apply it to anything else. There were people before us that had issues around certain things that were mandated or not, right? And I think they reconciled something in themselves, right? There's a community of people, there's a population of people that reconciled something in themselves because they took that responsibility seriously. Like, I have a responsibility to the greater good. And so all I wanted to say with that is I wonder if we have that same consideration today. In an environment where we have information at our fingertips, misinformation or otherwise is just at our fingertips, whereas in the past, perhaps not. So I wonder if that exacerbates the issue a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate, you bringing your lived experience and your stories into spaces like this, and I know that you touch people's lives in what you do. I don't think that everybody knows the depth that, as people listen to this, their mind is then altered a little for them to have a different way to think and to make some different choices, which I think is at the end of the day, what we need more of. We just need more dialogues.
Sure.
People, because the voices in our head are sometimes way louder than what they need to be, and have a direct correlation to mental health issues and a bunch of other things, relational issues. What I hope is that the positivity that needs to be sort of injected into some infrastructure right now is what needs to happen. It only happens through dialogue.
Sure.
And I appreciate you, and I think there's, and I've heard you do this multiple times. How do you help someone, even as an ally or just being your best self? How do you help someone stay positive in times of turmoil?
Yeah.
What is your recommendation? This is like a personal recommendation. Sure. It's like, what do you do? Because you around all this stuff, and you pretty positive.
Yeah, I'm going to answer it in two ways. I'm going to answer it in a very esoteric kind of way that's rooted in what I think my purpose is in life, and then in a very practical, tactical manner as well. So the first part is, I believe that my purpose in life is to be the highest expression of love in every area of my life, professionally, personally, relationships. And that means to be of service. How am I being of service to the world, and how do I show up, and being aware of that? The second piece of that, the more practical sense, is there are things that we can all do on a daily basis to make sure that we're grounded in who we are. I'm a big journaler. I've been journaling since the days of those small locket, with the small locks and keys, like those journals. I think it's an important practice, right? To just kind of, process your emotions, process your thoughts, have a tool that you can always revisit to see your journey, kind of revisit that. Lean into your creativity, right? If you're a creative person, I think we're all creative in our own ways. Lean into that, create something, be of service to something bigger than you in that way. And then something real is learn to cook with real food. Go to the market, buy fresh produce, get in the kitchen, cut the veggies up, right? Because what you're doing is you're taking your mind away from whatever you're ruminating on and putting it into the food, and putting all of that love and attention into the food as you're baking it, as you're cooking it, right? Like that act of cooking to me is so therapeutic, right? And then if you're able to serve that and share it with someone else, even better, right? But those are three things that I always lean on.
Yeah. So I'm always working on projects. So I'm taking the tips from all my guests. I'm gonna try to create this tabletop book, tips for being positive. Obviously, some people don't have tables, so it'll be digital. Whatever. But I'm gonna come up with something, because what I want to try to always help people understand is that through dialogue, progress happens. And I don't want people to sit in silence and have and to ruminate on things that create negativity. I would rather them spend their time in a positive space, thinking about the future. Our present is happening right now. Our past is already behind us, and I don't believe people can recycle time.
Right.
So let's focus on the future. Let's focus on the forward. Let's focus on moving forward, and that happens through dialogue. So thank you for being with me again. I appreciate you.
It was too long in between times, but I know we had a little thing called a panini or pandemic. to deal with. But
Yeah.
but I'm glad that we got here and that we're thriving, that we're surviving.
Okay.
That's the most important thing, and I'm always grateful to share dialogue with you, Reggie.
All right, man. All right. Thank you so much.
You got it.